I'm from New Hampshire. Back in my early 20s, I lived about 30 minutes outside Manchester. I had a girlfriend of 2 years that I had just broken up with. It was a strange time in my life, the kind where you're sort of wandering, figuring things out, maybe looking for meaning without realizing it. My grandmother was extremely religious and would attend liturgy religiously, no pun intended. After my grandfather passed away, I started going to church with her every Sunday. I tagged along partly to support her and partly because I felt like maybe I needed a bit of grounding myself. My grandfather had been a decorated veteran, well known and respected in our community, and losing him left a huge hole in her life. Even though she was grieving, her faith was unshaken. She told me that she knew he was finally reunited with the Lord, and I could see how much comfort that gave her. I admired it honestly. Faith like that, the kind that brings real peace, is rare. I think it's something that people search for their whole lives, even if they can't always put it into words. One Sunday after the service, I met this girl. This whole thing still feels like a fever dream. I'd never seen her around before, which was unusual since our community was close-knit, especially at church. She was striking with dark, curly hair and deep hazel eyes. I waited for the service to be over and approached her. Part of me was just attracted to her, but there was another part of me that was just curious about seeing someone new there, especially someone that looked around my age. We started talking, and the spark was definitely there. I'm sure everyone knows what I'm talking about, where you just meet someone and immediately feel a connection. Her name was Kaylee, and she had a kind of quiet, mysterious charm, and I found myself drawn in. I kept trying to ask her specific questions about her past, like family and home life, but she would crack jokes and tell me I'd have to take her out for those answers. I actually really enjoyed the banter. After a little playful nagging, she told me that her family recently moved to the area and she went to college nearby, which explained why I'd never seen her before. By the time we wrapped up, I managed to get her number, and I was kind of riding the high of meeting someone new. Over the next week, we texted pretty frequently and exchanged social media. I remember scrolling through her Instagram at one point, surprised that she had so few followers. I preferred that, though. The last thing anyone wants is to fall in love with someone that the whole world knows. We talked about a lot of things, and she eventually opened up more about her family. I don't want to say too much, but her situation wasn't great. Her stepfather was a nasty alcoholic and frequently mistreated both her and her mother. Her biological father was substantially worse, though. She wouldn't give me specific details, but apparently they had to move to get away from him. She transferred schools and everything, leaving everyone and everything she had known behind. I didn't want to overstep and ask her about her father. I was just glad she was opening up to me. As much as I loved the calculated mystique, it was nice to get to know her on a more personal level. I neglected to coordinate a date with her just yet because I figured I'd see her at church the following Sunday. She was there again. I took it as a sign and asked her on a date after the service. She didn't hesitate. She just smiled and said yes, and we made plans to meet up later that week. I spent the rest of the week thinking about her, nervous about our first date. When the night finally came, we kept things simple. We saw a movie and grabbed a bite to eat. Nothing fancy, just an easy night where we could talk and get to know each other even more. I honestly thought it was going really well. She was a great listener, and she seemed genuinely interested, which was refreshing. I didn't want the night to end just yet, so after dinner, I suggested going for a little drive, thinking it'd give us a chance to keep talking without the noise of a restaurant around us. So, we hit the highway, driving out of town a bit. We were driving along one of those roads that was technically a highway but looked more like a normal two-lane road. It was windy, and there were trees on either side of it. Everything was perfect. It's crazy how things can change in an instant. What I'm about to describe to you is something I will never be able to purge from my mind. Out of nowhere, she started speaking, but it wasn't in English. Her words were fast, mumbled, and sounded like French or something close to it. At first, I thought she was maybe joking or testing me, but then I noticed her eyes. They rolled back, leaving only the whites. I swerved the car and almost crashed into the barrier. My heart started pounding because it looked like she was in some kind of trance or having a seizure. I got a hold of myself and pulled over to the shoulder, trying to stay calm. At that point, I was internally panicking. I fumbled for my phone and called for an ambulance, not knowing what to say other than I thought she was having a seizure. As I waited, I kept checking on her, unsure if she even knew where she was. She was still talking, and her head seemed to be vibrating. I didn't know what the hell to do. I didn't want to touch her, but I felt like I had to do something. I had never been more terrified in my entire life. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it was over. She snapped her head to look at me and shut her mouth. She blinked with her eyes going back to normal, and she gave me this wild, wide-eyed expression. I will never forget that look as long as I live. Before I could say a word, she threw open the car door and literally sprinted full speed into the woods. I'll say that again. She literally ran into the woods. I was trying to make sense of what just happened, but I just couldn't move. My head was spinning, and I'm pretty sure my hands were still trembling. I sat in that position until the cops and paramedics showed up. I told them everything, even though it sounded insane. Every detail about the way her eyes looked and how she'd run off. They nodded and took my statement, assuring me that they'd try their best to find her. I must have looked insane, but they took me seriously enough. After that night, though, she was gone. I never saw her again. I looked for her at church, but she never showed up. Her Instagram was deleted, and she had apparently blocked my number. It was worse than that. I got a friend to text her number, and it apparently had been erased. No amount of internet stalking ever turned anything up. I even asked people at the church if they knew her, but no one did. I don't know what happened to her, and I'm not sure I'll ever know. I don't live there anymore, and my memory of home is kind of messed up because of the incident. Have you ever experienced something unexplainable? Share your story with us. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.